When you have 12 million people respond to a hashtag in 24 hours, we have a public health crisis.
If you want to lead in this country, then you have to actually solve for this problem. We want our leaders to treat sexual violence as a national priority.
When people said Me Too, they were counting on people to hear them and to be with them and to drive together for change.
Candidates and elected officials overall have been pretty silent on what they're going to do to advance the rights and interests of survivors.
We're not asking politicians to check off a box and say, oh, we did Me Too, we got that covered. The constituents that you are responsible for in this country, millions of them raise their hand to say Me Too, and you have not responded to them yet. MeTooVoter is to underscore the fact that I am not just a survivor. I'm a Black woman, I'm a mother, I'm an activist, I'm an advocate, and I'm a survivor. And I need you to respond to all of those things, not just any one of them.
We know that survivors collectively are a force, and they're a force as voters.
Politicians are not putting forth policy proposals related to this problem and treating it as the epidemic that it is.
It's shocking to me that the story of sexual violence and solutions to address sexual violence and support survivors have not been at the forefront of the elections conversation. We need to change that.
It's time for policymakers to truly listen to survivors as voters, to listen to survivors as constituents, as workers.
Currently, our civil rights law that prohibits discrimination actually doesn't cover all workers in all workplaces.
There are millions of workers who fall through the cracks. At the federal level, in order to be protected by our Title VII sexual harassment and discrimination protections, you have to have at least 15 employees in your workplace. That effectively excludes the entire care industry. In the domestic work setting, the vast majority of workplaces are just one person.
There are policies around statute of limitations that say that a person who has survived sexual violence only has this amount of time to seek any kind of recourse. We don't have comprehensive sex education in our schools as a federal law across the country.
When you have a situation in which there are workers who actually have no protection under our federal law for sexual violence against them, that makes the situation even more dangerous for them.
Some of the least visible, most vulnerable workforces are places where this issue is most pervasive. So just thinking about domestic work and care work where workers are incredibly isolated, working alone, hidden behind closed doors. Oftentimes it's women of color, oftentimes it's immigrant women who are vulnerable on multiple fronts of their lives.
We need to connect the poverty wages and the poor working conditions overall with the risk factors for sexual violence and other kinds of exploitation against workers.
We've seen what's possible when policymakers actually want to take action. We've seen exciting momentum around one fair wage so that tip workers aren't having to choose between enduring harassment and getting enough pay to support their families. We've seen survivors come together and take on the Department of Education as it tries to make it easier for schools to get away with not addressing sexual violence on their campus.
Imagine if there were resources that were put into the Violence Against Women Act or create a new legislation that gave resources to colleges and organizations that deal with sexual violence beyond just your immediate crisis services. Imagine if there was legislation that talked about HR policies at a corporation that on the front end, before you hire people, required you to do an amount of work to make sure that you're not bringing people into your company that could be potentially sexual harassers, right?
These are the things that people should be talking about. It's time to hear plans.
Women, even though we're the majority of voters, in 2018 we were 54% of the electorate, we are still treated as a minority and a special interest group, and so many of the concerns and experiences and priorities of women, especially women of color, are still really sidelined.
Imagine if we voted along the lines of our survival. Not red, not blue, not green, not any other place, but along the lines of, I'm only voting for the candidate that puts my safety as a priority. I'm only voting for the candidate that takes my safety seriously. I'm only voting for the candidate that understands that healing is not linear, and I'm gonna need more time, I'm gonna need more space, I'm gonna need more resources to come back to myself as a whole person and a whole citizen. Imagine what that looks like. Survivors are absolutely a constituency, and we are a power base because there's too many of us to deny.
An issue that was taboo is no longer taboo, and now we're not asking whether change is possible, we're asking what next is going to be possible because of the collective work that we're doing.
The issue of sexual violence isn't one that began with the Harvey Weinstein stories, and it won't end with the next election. But we have a tremendous opportunity now to meet the cultural moment and drive the sort of change that is lasting. The millions of people who said Me Too, they don't just live online. They have gathered together in community. They have gone and pressed their workplaces to make meaningful change.
Survivors are change makers.
Workers,
Students,
Survivors are family,
In our military.
powerful.
resilient.
solutionaries,
Survivors are voters.